are some players that can help you beat the bye week blues, survive the bye week blues. That and more this week on the IDP Blitz, joined by Gary Davenport, a true OG. And one time, Robert Quinn was someone we could count on for two different teams. He's back with the Bears. We're going to see him play on Thursday, Gary. So we're going to have to make a decision early. What decisions should we make with him?
I think if you're in a bind on the defensive line, say you've got Max Crosby on a bye, which is unfortunate because Crosby's been unbelievable so far this season. I mean, the Bears I think they've got 8 sacks for the season. They're like 25th in the league. But their pressure and hurry numbers have actually been pretty good. They're at the bottom of the league in blitz percentage too. So they're just sending 4. They're getting the pressures and the hurries. They haven't gotten the sack so far. I expect that to change Thursday night. The Washington offensive line has been horrible this year. They're right at the top of the league in sacks allowed. Carson Wentz, not a quarterback known for his mobility. It's been a rough year for Quinn's fantasy managers. I think he's got half a dozen tackles and 1 sack for the season, but he's going to get home in week 6 and register sack 2, maybe even sack 3.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see who's coming farther along. The Bears defense or Justin Fields. And yes, Carson Wentz, if he can get in his face, smoke comes out of his ears. That's good. That's good for IDP fantasy football. Someone else who's been good for IDP fantasy football, especially if you can use him as a defensive tackle. I think originally was drafted to be more of a 3-4 end for the Cardinals. One of the few things going right with the Cardinals defense, maybe something that goes right with your IDP team if you get Zach Allen.
Oh, Allen's been outstanding the last couple of weeks. I think it's 14 total tackles and a sack in each of the last 2 games. I want to say his pass rush win percentage is 18 or 19%. It's 4th in the NFL among defensive tackles. I mean, right now he's playing better than J.J. Watt. I mean, there's just no comparing it. Allen is playing great football. Seahawks aren't a great IDP matchup, but they're not a terrible one. And he's a guy, I mean, you look at that, I think it was 6 tackles one week, 8 tackles the other week, a sack in both games. You got to love that fantasy floor if you're in a bye week bind. And like you said, with some providers, he has eligibility as a defensive tackle, and that just makes him that much more attractive.
Yeah, this game, there could be games that are bananas for offensive and defensive fantasy football, and this Arizona-Seattle game could be one, but we'll all be watching Buffalo and Kansas City, so we won't really know what happens in that game. We kind of have to watch Denver. Do we have to watch Denver again? We have to watch Denver again, Gary. Again, maybe one reason to watch them is if you plug Alex Singleton in your lineup. Is that smart to do this week with 4 teams on bye?
Oh, absolutely. I think Singleton is now, as long as Josey Jewell's out with the knee sprains, Alex Singleton's a every week fantasy starter. He's shown time and again. Last year in Philadelphia, he had 137 tackles. Year before that, he had 120 tackles. I'm not saying Alex Singleton is a good NFL linebacker because that would make me either wrong or a liar. But when he's out there, he racks up stats. I mean, he just swallowed. And, if he makes a tackle 6 yards down the field, it counts the same as a tackle at the line of scrimmage for us. So, yeah, and he was the every down linebacker the first couple weeks of the year when Jewell was out. I don't see any reason why that's going to change. Had 9 total tackles this past week against the Colts. Chargers are an okay fantasy matchup for linebackers. I think Singleton's at least probably an LB3 and wouldn't be surprised if he cracks the top 25 for week 6.
Yeah, after what we saw last week. By the way, Baron Browning, everybody. He's coming. I wish they would play him at inside linebacker too. I know there was originally some possibility of that when he got drafted, but I feel like Baron Browning's one of those players they accidentally, because of an injury to Randy Gregory, oh yeah, we have something here. Not so much with Alex Singleton, however, because of Baron Browning, because of Bradley Chubb, because we saw what Deion Jackson and Phillip Lindsay did against this running game, because we saw what Eckler and Kelly did against Cleveland, there could be a lot of tackle opportunities for one Alex Singleton. Another name that keeps coming back, a name that had a lot more prominence previously in IDP leagues, Quan Alexander, and we were wondering how this was going to shake out with the Jets. We got maybe some clarity enough for us to know what to do this week.
Yeah, so long as Quincy Williams out, it looks like Quan Alexander is going to be an every down guy. Now, whether that continues once Williams comes back from his, I believe it's high ankle sprain. So you probably got at least two or three more weeks with Quan Alexander. Was on the field for 94% of the defensive snaps last week against the Miami Dolphins. Week before that, I think it was 92%. Numbers haven't been outstanding, but anytime you've got a guy getting those kind of snap counts, he should be on the IDP radar. And they're going up against a Green Bay Packers team that I want to say is 8th or 9th in the league in fantasy points allowed to linebackers. This is not your father's Green Bay offense. This is not, grip it, rip it, and throw it to Devontae Adams. This is A.J. Dillon and Aaron Jones and run the ball and short passes. And it means a lot of tackle ops for the linebackers. So I don't like Alexander as much as I do Singleton this week, but if you've got a guy on a bye or you've got some injury problems, you could do a lot worse. He's probably not going to blow up on the stat sheet, but I don't think he's going to leave you hanging either.
Yeah, got the experience, and that's a much more intriguing game than what it looked like before the season started. Speaking of intrigue unfolding, I got to ask you about Deion Jones, because move kind of went under the radar. Cleveland trades for him. I know we were looking at maybe Jacob Phillips getting a larger opportunity with Anthony Walker out. Is there anything there? Should folks be scrambling to prioritize him in their waiver wire pickups this week? And if so, when do you think we can start using him? What would the forecast be for his ramp up to usage?
I don't know that I'd scramble to add him. If you have an extra spot, I feel a little bit better about Deion Jones than I do about Blake Martinez, but I feel similarly about both of them. If you have a roster spot that you can spare, I think they're worth a speculative add. I do believe there's a clearer path to significant snaps for Deion Jones than there is for Blake Martinez, because you look at the timing of the trade. I mean, that game had been over for 7 minutes, and Andrew Berry is on the phone to the Atlanta Falcons like, dude, we need a linebacker. Who you got? Mm-hmm. Because I think the last 2 weeks, Cleveland has given up, I want to say, 440 rushing yards, which is a lot for 2 games. Yeah. It's quite a bit. Tampa doesn't give up that many rushing yards in a month.
Right.
And Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah is a smaller guy. He's getting swallowed up in the mass of humanity at the line of scrimmage. Jacob Phillips, we need to get him a protractor because he needs to get his geometry on and learn some angles. Because
you're being kind. You're trying to be kind. Like maybe it's correctable. Maybe we could just go back to like 10th grade algebra and trigonometry, and that'll. But I think it's a good diagnosis.
They haven't been good.
Yeah,
and it's going to take Deion Jones a little while to get up to speed, and we're not sure what kind of shape he's in. Because from what I understand, he had the offseason surgery, played a little bit in the preseason, aggravated that a little bit. So they put him on IR. He's been on there for 4 weeks. So assuming that he's healthy or fairly close, give it a week or two for him to learn the scheme. Maybe if he's healthy, maybe we see him for just a smattering of snaps in week 6, ramp it up in week 7. I'd say week 8 is probably the earliest I would expect any kind of real contribution. And if it does come, I would expect it's probably going to come at the expense of Jacob Phillips.
Yeah, I think so. And we'll see. But you absolutely told that story perfectly, that the Browns are just tired of getting run all over. And we'll see. It's another intriguing matchup. They're all intriguing. New England and Cleveland this week, and Ramondre Stevenson. Ramondre Stevenson coming like a rhinoceros.
Smash bot.
Yeah. So
Ramondre Stevenson. If you got Ramondre Stevenson, he need to be in the lineup.
Yeah.
DFS, Dynasty, redraft.
100%. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the game plan against Cleveland this week, and we'll see what Cleveland does, what New England does to slow down Nick Chubb, speaking of a rhinoceros. Okay, let's move back to the defensive backfield. I got to mention Andre Sisco, just because Syracuse, and just because he did have that scintillating pick 6 that made it seem like, wow, maybe this Jags-Philly game was going to be more interesting than it actually ended up being. But there's another safety back there, Rayshawn Jenkins, and we actually even have our first rematch of the year, Gary. It's the second matchup between Jacksonville and Indianapolis. Jacksonville won that first one 24-0. And do we have enough information about Jenkins now to trust him in our lineup?
Yeah, he's been hot the last couple of weeks. His production's been up. Tackle numbers have been decent. Sisco's a guy who's going to be more big play dependent because he plays more deep safety. You look at the Indianapolis Colts, I think they're second in fantasy points allowed to safeties. You get a guy in Jenkins who's a little hot. Anytime you're talking about defensive backs and you're looking at the waiver wire, there's going to be a lot of speculation. So, you look at the matchups, try to find a guy who's been hot. and roll the dice. I think Jenkins is going to be a solid DB2 this week. I personally have picked him up in a few leagues where I either have bye week problems or my safeties just have not been good, because I tend to have a really short attention span with defensive backs. And if you're not producing, you are not long for my roster. So there's a lot of turnover. So Rayshawn, he'll be on my roster for at least 1 week. We'll see how he does Sunday.
Yeah, I think that's the right way. No remorse. You just move on. I won an IDP championship in one of John Norton's leagues in Red Eye Masters. I think my starting lineup that week, Gary, and it's easier on the waiver wire in the playoffs because you don't have as much competition. Something like 7 out of my 10 or 11 guys I picked up in the last 2 or 3 weeks. So it can work, but you have to be up on the trends, which is why you subscribe to Footballguys, why you follow Gary. It's why you follow Matt Schauf. It's why you follow John Norton. You get all this good IDP information. One last safety note, and then we'll send everyone on their merry way to set their lineups, make their moves. And I'm remembering the 2020 safety class, Gary. It was a tremendous class. And some of them hit right away. Guys like Antoine Winfield, Jeremy Chin. They hit right away. Some of them, we had injuries, Xavier McKinney, and one Grant Delpit. And Delpit was in a bit of a murky situation where, it looked like Ronnie Harrison was coming on last year. Of course, they got John Johnson, an underrated player. But now we are starting to get some clarity on how the safety roles are going to shake out and how that's going to translate to IDP production, because somebody's got to get in the way of Ramondre Stevens. How about Grant Delpit?
Yeah, I think I like him quite a bit this week. The Patriots are actually a surprisingly good matchup for defensive backs. You wouldn't think so, given their issues throwing the ball. But like you said, the linebacker issues in front of him in Cleveland are a big problem. So he's probably going to be riding Ramondre Stevenson down the field quite a few times this week. He hasn't been as productive this year as I figured he'd be. I actually liked Delpit quite a bit coming into the season as a guy I thought might have a little bit of a breakout. That hasn't necessarily come yet. Coming off a season-high 9 total tackles this past week against the Chargers. Probably several of those were tackling Austin Eckler after Jacob Phillips and or JOK whiffed on him. Might happen again this week. I think Delpit's probably a pretty good bet for 7 to 9 tackles this week. Maybe he'll get a pass defense thrown in there. Again, when you're picking these guys up off the waiver wire, the odds you're going to grab a guy who's going to smash top 5 right out of the gate, probably not great. But if you can pick up a couple safeties off the waiver wire and each one of those guys finishes, in that 16 to 22 range, and you've got your linebackers and your defensive line squared away, which is what I do in drafts. I focus on the linebackers and the defensive line, hit the defensive backs late, and if those guys don't pan out, I just sit on the waiver wire. If you've got your linebackers and your defensive line squared away, you don't need your safeties to score in the top 5, top 10 every week. You'll be fine with guys like Delpit and Jenkins. And I expect not great weeks, but good weeks out of both this week.
Yeah, I think you can absolutely play that musical chairs with your defensive backs, and there's a supply there. And that's a more big picture topic, like what I did with the IDP show guys last week, talking about IDP fantasy football. And what's great is with a lot of help from you, a lot of people don't know what Gary does behind the scenes to help, in so much as there's order. Maybe I shouldn't tell them, Gary. In so much as there's order in the IDP world, a lot of it is because of the tireless work of Gary Davenport, including joining us once every 3 weeks here on the IDP Blitz. You can find his work at Footballguys. You can find his work on a lot of places. You can follow him at IDP Sharks. And it is a great thing to get to enjoy the IDP expertise of Gary and John Norton and Matt Schauf. We're here every Wednesday afternoon, or if you're getting this in podcast form, you'll be getting it Wednesdays, early Thursdays. I hope you all are enjoying it, and you should enjoy it because we want to bring you the best, because you're the classiest and you play the only real fantasy football, IDP fantasy.